I worked with a client. He was a master's level clinician, and he worked for an agency. He started a private practice. He's using in the private practice. There's no real supervision to tell you need to end your private practice and get yourself some help. I don't think I can help you right now in the way that you work. Literally, people's lives are in danger when you have people like that practicing.
Absolutely. That's an impaired practitioner. And what I would ask those people that legally could have reported him and didn't, and even worse, encouraged him to continue practicing, is, would you have wanted this clinician treating a family member of yours? If you take somebody that is, has a cannabis use disorder, they don't really have any severe mental health symptoms, they're just smoking too much pot and maybe not functioning as well as they could have, you're going to have a hard time getting coverage for that, especially at a higher level of care. A lot of programs put a ton of emphasis into residential treatment, into making it the best possible experience that they can for 30 to 60 days, 90 days maybe. But there's very little done for aftercare and support and direction of what that person should do. And so, I'm 19, 20, 21 years old, and I possess very few life skills of any kind. And then, you put somebody into a sober house and you tell them to go to 12-step recovery, which is great, and have them figure it out. Maybe they come to an IOP for a couple of weeks. And I think that's where, for me, I would always fall off.
This is one of the ideas in the book. If that's all you get, why would you want to stay in recovery anyway? This is the Recovery Guide podcast with Michael Herbert, where powerful stories and actionable insights empower individuals on their recovery journey to build resilience and make a lasting impact. I'm glad you're here, so let's get started. Today's guest is John Puls, who's a licensed mental health counselor, and we're talking about marijuana, kratom, plant-based medicine, and the direction treatment is going, and the direction marijuana is going in our society. So we're going to talk about individuals who've experienced psychosis, families that have been challenged with loved ones who have legally gotten marijuana, and literally it's ruining their lives. You're going to learn a lot today. There's tons of education and value that you're going to learn from John today. Actually, I know you'll love this episode. So I did want to talk a little bit about the field that we're working in. And one of the things, and I don't want to take anything away from anyone's skill set.
Sure.
But oftentimes I've noticed that there's a lot of master's level people. They graduate university, they get a job at an agency, and it seems only to get licensed. And as soon as they get licensed, they leave the agency and start a private practice. In my view, they don't have enough experience for that. I know when I started working in the field, and we could talk about this also, there was a mix of addiction counselors and master's level social workers. There was also a mix of 60-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 35-year-olds, all in one agency. And now most agencies have 40-year-olds and under who are interns. There are no longer addiction counselors there anymore. They don't even validate that anymore. Running these agencies, and they don't seem to have the experience that they used to have, or clinicians used to have, 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's very concerning to me, and it's a question of when is enough experience. And I certainly think, before you're licensed, that's not enough experience. You happen to get licensed, it's at least 2 years is really the fastest you can do it. So conceivably, you have somebody that's been practicing for 2 years only, and then they're somehow able to go into private practice. And I do think it's too soon. The problem I see with a lot of agencies is that especially addiction treatment agencies, the vast majority of the primary therapists are going to be registered interns, which means they have less than 2 years of experience for the most part. Sometimes people have been a registered intern for longer for one reason or another, but for the most part, it's under 2 years. And that is the bulk of the treating clinicians in the agency. And again, it's not taking away from anyone's experience. I was a registered intern, right? I was practicing as a registered intern in this building.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that. But I was also practicing with a lot of really experienced people. I was notably the least experienced, surrounded by so many more seasoned people that I could do supervision with, give me feedback and guidance, say, hey, don't do that again. And here's why, right?
Yeah.
And without that, it's the blind leading the blind.
The blind leading the blind. I worked with a client, came to my office. He was a master's level clinician and had relapsed. And he worked for an agency. They let him go at the agency. He started a private practice. He's using in the private practice. There's no real supervision. And when we talked, I said, I'm bound by ethics, and I have some responsibility over the field to tell you, you need to end your private practice and get yourself some help. I don't think I can help you right now in the way that you were. And in our discussion, you can go away to treatment, you can do 1,000,001 things, get a job somewhere else, get some time under your belt. And the reason why he wouldn't do it, I can't make this kind of money just working a regular job. So for him, it was all about the money. And he was seeing me in a group. He had a therapist who didn't report him because of the laws in Florida. So I had to find out, is this true? And the laws in Florida are, I guess, such that confidentiality protects this individual and that therapist couldn't. But anyone could make an anonymous report and leave it at that. And that really is what needed to happen to that individual. So I discontinued seeing that person. I personally felt offended that the agency that the person worked for didn't report him. The agency that this person went to treatment told him, you can work with mental health clients, just stay away from the addicted ones. Even his social work supervisor enabled him. So all of these professionals enabled this one individual, and it was just bothered the hell out of me that happened. It felt so unethical. So I got to do what I got to do, because literally people's lives are in danger when you have people like that practicing.
Absolutely. That's an impaired practitioner. And what I would ask those people that legally could have reported him and didn't, and even worse, encouraged him to continue practicing, is, would you have wanted this clinician treating a family member of yours? Because they're going to be treating someone's family, and there is a duty to protect patients from impaired practitioners. And it seems like for whatever reason, and I think in particular that person's agency that they were working for was under the most obligation to initiate that report. And I forget the exact name of it. I'll have to think about it afterwards, but there's an organization where you can actually report impaired practitioners to that's not the state board, not like the Department of Health. and they will contact that individual and inform them that there's been a report made, and they can have the opportunity to go to treatment without the Department of Health being involved.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's unfortunate. Sometimes I think, well, the agencies don't report because they don't want to lose business. If they report one of their clinicians and the word gets out that they had an impaired professional and Joe Blow relapses and that was his therapist, I want my money back because there was an impaired professional working with my loved one. So, that's one of the unfortunate things that are happening in the field, although I can acknowledge there are plenty of healthy, ethically practicing clinicians in the field.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. But what I wanted to talk to you about today, and probably maybe it's a little personal thing with me, is about marijuana. And I know you've done a lot of work on this. I got to tell you, I'm a person in recovery. In my active addiction, I smoked weed all the time. And I was never going to get psychotic. I could smoke weed from morning till night and never got psychotic. Today's marijuana is so different. People are getting effed up all over from smoking weed. And in my mind, because of my experience, how could that happen? These people can't handle weed? So there really is a difference today than it was before. And I will also say, as a person in recovery, that particular drug is the drug that I personally have the most denial around, as it being, that wasn't so bad. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So what's going on today with weed? I want to talk about the potency of it. I want to talk about the laws. I want to talk about the treatment, because there was also a time where insurance wouldn't pay for people who were smoking pot. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start with what you originally spoke about, which is the potency and the true experience that you had of not really experiencing any terrible consequences from smoking pot, other than probably being less motivated, sleeping too much, not being as productive as you probably could have.
Mm-hmm. They used to say back then, marijuana was the drug of the future.
Right.
Smoke a joint, I'll take care of it tomorrow.
Right, the drug of the future, exactly. And that was maybe not good in some certain circumstances, but certainly wasn't catastrophic and requiring hospitalizations. People weren't having psychotic breaks. And that's absolutely true. And what in a lot of my own research and what a lot of the qualitative research has confirmed is that the pot that you were smoking, and when was that? What year approximately?
We're talking about in the 70s.
Right, so
70s and 80s.
70s and 80s. And that's actually right around where they did some of the first medical marijuana studies, was 80s, 90s. And really what it comes down to is cannabis back then was on average 2 to 5% THC. Maybe you would get something that was really strong. It would be 8 to 10%. But that was the absolute maximum. And today, and we'll talk about the accessibility and the legality around it, you're going to be really hard pressed to find any dispensary, anybody selling pot illegally that's going to be anything close to 2 to 5% THC. The vast majority is over 40%.
Wow.
And that's just that's
a huge difference.
Yeah. And that's just the cannabis flower. Now you get into concentrates, which is what most young people are using. Reason being,
is that what they put in the vapes?
Correct. Yeah. So that's the cartridges, right? So they're about the size of a thumb drive, an extended thumb drive, fit it right in your pocket. It's not completely odorless, but it's pretty close. Certainly not the amount of odor and smoke that flower has. Those concentrates can be anywhere from 40 to 99% THC. And so when you are using cannabis that is that concentrated, and I'll actually back up, the vape cartridges are typically like 40 to 90%. When you get over the 90%, you're getting into what are called dabs. Have you heard of dabs?
I haven't heard of dabs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So dabs are it basically looks like a wax. Like it looks like a piece of glass almost. And you have to use
like opium.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of. And you have to use a specialized device called a dab rig typically to ingest it properly. And what it is it's a highly, highly concentrated form of THC that can be up to 99% THC. And people are taking hits out of dab rigs. And so one of the reasons that a lot of parents that I speak to are saying, cannabis wasn't that big a deal. I smoked pot when I was younger. Nothing happened to me, is because they were using significantly less strong cannabis. It is not the same weed these days. It just truly isn't. And so what I try to explain to parents and people that are using this stuff is that you have to almost view this as a different drug, right? So we wouldn't view a Tylenol 3 with a low amount of codeine the same way we do as fentanyl, right? We wouldn't view a Vicodin the same way we do as fentanyl, right? Same class of drugs and opioids, but it's a different substance and carries much different risks. The truth is that, low-dose THC cannabis carries less risks. The risks are still there, especially if you're predisposed to schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders in your family, but they're substantially less than the concentrates.
So you're saying the weed that I smoked in the 70s and 80s was what percentage again?
Typically 2 to 5%.
2 to 5%. And the weed that they're smoking today, even at a dispensary, is the lower would be 40%.
That's correct.
So 40% versus 2%, that's a huge difference. And then from 40 to 90, wow.
Right.
I can't even imagine, how do you smoke that? Because I only come from smoking a joint. I can't imagine smoking a whole joint of that without being knocked out.
Right. And knocked out is actually the better of the potential negative consequences. So if you look at states that first legalized for both medical and recreational, we're talking Colorado, California. Those are some like the pioneering states. And those states had a massive increase in hospitalizations for one specific thing, and that was panic attacks. So people have a much higher likelihood with these high concentrates to having extreme panic attacks and anxiety attacks and going into the emergency room because they feel like they're having a heart attack. For anyone that's had a panic attack before, you feel it in your body, your heart's racing, you feel like something is medically wrong with you. And they're seeking medical attention only to find out that it was an effect from the cannabis.
Okay. So how do you treat it? What's the treatment?
Well, so as far as how to treat it, I mean, listen, cannabis...
Well, let's go back to a person who has insurance. Are insurance companies still denying?
The short answer is yes. Insurance companies are still denying it. It really has to be a severe cannabis use disorder. You have to be able to prove a level of occupational and social impairment to functioning in the same way that you would any addiction, but you really have to prove it. The other way that a lot of insurance companies are covering it or facilities are getting coverage is by treating the co-occurring mental health issues that are happening as a result of the cannabis use, whether that's severe anxiety, depression, psychosis. That is typically how they're getting coverage. If you take somebody that is, has a cannabis use disorder, they don't really have any severe mental health symptoms. They're just smoking too much pot and maybe not functioning as well as they could have. You're going to have a hard time getting coverage for that, especially at a higher level of care.
Yeah. Okay. Now, your agency, what's the name of your agency?
Full Life Comprehensive Care, yeah.
And,
it's Full Life.
And are you substance abuse, co-occurring disorder? What is your...
So we really specialize in more mental illness. We will absolutely work with substance use disorder because it comes along with it. But we really specialize in more severe and persistent mental illness. So that is schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar 1, severe personality disorders. With all those diagnoses often comes a substance use disorder. But that's not the bulk of what we treat.
So when you look at your population, what percent is pure mental health and what percent is mental health and?
Sure. So I would say probably 70% is pure mental health, and then the rest would be mental health and addiction.
All right. And is the demographic usually younger people or is it all over?
So it's mostly younger people for sure. So adolescents and young adults, which is where we're seeing more and more people entering treatment at that stage.
So what got you into, I mean, for me, 18, 16-year-olds, I can't work with them. It's just too much for me. I don't have the personality to do that. How did you get into these younger people?
Well, so I too had a misguided youth, we'll say. Right.
Okay.
So I was one of these kids at one point. So I have, I guess, a built-in patience for it.
But let's go back to that a little bit. How did your parents handle you? What was the thing with you and your parents if you were that kind of kid?
Yeah, well, they didn't know how to handle me. They tried their best. My dad's actually a clinical psychologist, and my mom's a psychiatric nurse.
Oh boy, yeah.
So, people say I was screwed from the beginning.
Yeah.
But I had tons of issues in high school. I often joke now. It wasn't so funny back then, but I was expelled from my high school twice and let back twice, all for petty stuff, cannabis use, things like that. And so they didn't handle me very well. I certainly, I saw tons of different therapists and doctors and stuff like that. I never went to any formal treatment as an adolescent. But it is a very difficult population to treat because there's such a lack of awareness of anything being an issue and a severe impulsivity problem.
Well, I'm going to stick with you here for a minute. So you were using drugs. You're getting high. What I know about you is that you're very, very bright. So you're smarter than most. I'm not trying to compliment you. You're a smart guy. Do you think that was part of the problem? That you were so smart?
Yeah, so it was part of the problem. And also, I mean, because of the intelligence factor, and I appreciate that, but it was also that I was able to talk my way out of things. I was a good kid. I was just the kid that was going through a phase, and it would, people gave me a lot of patience and understanding that was totally undeserved.
Let me make a comment about that too, because you're bringing up something for me. You almost have the problem of looking innocent.
Right.
You don't look like a criminal. You don't look like a bad guy. It's like you look believable.
Right.
You don't have the long hair and the tattoos and all. This guy looks like he's coming from university.
Right.
This guy looks like a prep school good kid. He's a good,
right.
Kid. And oftentimes that I've worked with people like that, and that has really been a disadvantage to them because they looked so like not a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'll bring it back to myself in a second, but I think that is a common problem because the reality is the prep school kids and the good looking kid and whatever it is, they have the same types of issues, but it just goes more underground. I think that comes from some stereotyping perhaps of what we believe problematic substance use looks like in adolescents or young adults. We have this preconceived notion that it looks like something in particular. And so when it doesn't match that, people are like, well, it can't be that bad. Right. And it was that bad.
Yeah.
But, and frankly, that's a lot of the kids that I work with. And it was certainly the case for myself as well. And again, that afforded me an unearned privilege, I think. And I say unearned in that it was kind of just my personality and my upbringing.
Sure.
So, it's just how I grew up. And so that, I think, made people really downplay the severity of what was going on, which is certainly a common occurrence in other cases.
Yeah. And probably led you to get sicker and sicker.
Absolutely.
So they actually helped you get to the point where you needed help by enabling you so much that it forced it to happen. And so you didn't go to rehab.
Well, not in adolescence.
Oh, okay.
Not in adolescence. I did in adulthood.
One time or?
About 6.
Oh, about 6.
Yeah.
See, you you kept on trying out different programs to see, try to find the right fit.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what didn't you get?
So, I mean, I can sit here and point to some, critiques, especially now with my experience in the field. But I think more so than anything, I really didn't have any internal motivation to change. The internal motivation I had was to calm everything down, get the heat off, so to speak. But there was no real shift that I had. And also, a lot of programs put a ton of emphasis into residential treatment, into making it the best possible experience that they can for 30 to 60 days, 90 days maybe. But there's very little done for aftercare and support and direction of what that person should do. And so, I'm 19, 20, 21 years old, and I possess very few life skills of any kind. Yeah. And then, you put somebody into a sober house and you tell them to go to 12-step recovery, which is great, and have them figure it out. Maybe they come to an IOP for a couple of weeks. And I think that's where, for me, I would always fall off.
Well, and I got to tell you, I wrote a book.
Sure.
And so this is one of the ideas in the book. If that's all you get, why would you want to stay in recovery anyway? I really love that they now have some of these adventure-based programs where people are getting the therapy, they're getting the 12-step stuff, but they're also getting some other stuff so they have something to do. A treatment program is only as good as their aftercare and their continuing care. When I first got into the field, I worked at an intensive outpatient program. So we had the same kind of clients that went to intensive outpatient that went to residential. Our results were probably very similar. These clients didn't necessarily need to go to residential, but in an intensive outpatient program, we had to figure out, what are these guys going to do on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays and Sundays when we weren't there, because they were working all day and then they came to us. So we were able to put together more of a continuing care plan, and we were working with these people for a year. And I think the lack of continuing care is what causes problems, but also the lack of engagement in other things other than therapy. What 19-year-old, this is life for me, is sitting in some church basement or some community center, sitting at a table, raising my hand, yakking about what's going on in my life that's working or not working. And then you got to walk through a cloud of smoke to get in and out of the place.
Absolutely. And this is something I talk about a lot. I think that unless you have an idea or a picture of what the world can be like in recovery, regardless, whatever it is, whatever substance or mental health issue, why continue doing it? I remember very distinctly at about, when I finally got sober, I was maybe 4 months sober, I had made the decision to go back to school. And as I'm sure you can imagine, many people in the field and other people in 12-step programs told me that was a bad idea, that I wasn't ready for it. But I knew I needed something to work towards. I knew I needed some other type of purpose that would help me grow other than working as a busser at a restaurant.
So you're ready to be a barista at Starbucks, but you're not ready to go to school.
Yeah.
And this is the wisdom from who?
Right. And that's such a good point. And I think so many things, I mean, out of all probably mental health and medical conditions, nothing has more opinions that aren't grounded in any type of evidence than addiction recovery.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just something that's been passed on. So somebody at some point decided, 3 months, 4 months was too soon to go back to school.
Yeah.
And you ask them why, they don't really have a good answer. You challenge them, well, does it depend on the person? Well, yeah, it could depend on the person.
Yeah.
And I think that, and it wasn't that school was the answer for me, but I needed something outside of this bubble that I was in and this experience that I had for so long. And all of a sudden, I'm around other students. I'm participating in other, like campus activities that aren't necessarily confined to recovery. And being able to branch out into the world was incredibly meaningful for me. And I think something that gets lost, and it doesn't have to be school.
Yeah.
Right. It can be anything. But
yeah.
Yeah.
I interviewed a person a couple of weeks ago, and their thing was boxing. They got into boxing. They became an MMA champ, and their recovery really surrounded around that activity that they did regularly. And it was enough for them. And anyone would have told, oh, no, you need to do this or you need to do that. Well, I know people who are doing this and that and can't stay clean.
Right.
So why is boxing wrong? If the goal is, and I'm focused on abstinence, basically you can do whatever you want after you've achieved get your abstinence and do whatever you want. It may not be aligned with what other people are doing, but if it works for you, why? Why can't we expand this definition of what recovery is? Why does it have to be so rigid?
Right. And I think the rigidity does a real disservice to so many people. And I think most of these professionals are very well intentioned. But I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, and I've certainly made this mistake before, is that they take whatever was their own experience in their recovery journey and translate to that must be what everyone else should do.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when I first got into recovery, I smoked cigarettes and I wanted to quit. They said, oh, no, you're taking on too much. Okay. So my therapist smoked. My brother got into recovery a year after me, and the place that he went to, there was no smoking. And he quit, and he stayed quit. So he was able to quit smoking a year and a half before I did, because the wisdom of the place was a drug is a drug is a drug, and nicotine is a drug, and this is probably the better place to get support around quitting than later on. And eventually I did quit, but I got the wrong information. They tell people no relationships for the first year. You tell an addict no relationship for the first year, that's the first thing they're going to do.
Of course.
So why don't you help people have relationships that are healthy? Maybe let's take 90 days of no relationship just so you can get stable, and then let's learn to date.
Right.
But if you're going to fall in love the first week, then that could be a problem. If you're one of those people, those are the people who probably don't need to, but there's a large percentage of the people that could manage, a relationship and focus on themselves.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's always so interesting to me. I remember being in these long clinical meetings where we would all be discussing as a clinical team the various relationships that people were getting in and how it was bad and wrong, and we had to do something about it. And I remember finally I was just so frustrated, and I was like, guys, we are working in a mental health facility, an addiction treatment mental health facility with predominantly younger people and some older people. Of course they're going to get into relationships with each other. We will never be able to stop that. Why not instead shift the focus to what's coming up for that person? How are they behaving in that relationship? How is that shown up in other areas of their life? How could it be problematic, rather than trying to stop it? Because as soon as you try and stop it, they're going to stop talking to you about it.
They're going to stop talking to you about it, and they're going to sneak around it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of misinformation around addiction and recovery, but I think we're moving to a better place. One of the things that I also talk about is all of the in expanding the definition of what recovery is. Again, why isn't climbing a mountain as equal as a therapy session or going to a 12-step meeting? Sometimes recovering people are terrible ambassadors of what recovery is, because there's a lot of recovery people who are doing 1,000,001 different things, but don't talk about that as recovery. The only thing they talk about as recovery is they go to their meetings, they go to their therapy, they do the 12 steps, and they have a sponsor. But I got a guy who's a race car driver. We have the MMA fighters. We have people who are going back into school, and all of that, in my view, is part of recovery. It's not just don't drink and go to a meeting.
I completely agree. It reminds me of, and I think the movie was actually called As Good as It Gets. I forget the actor, but at one point, he gets on his hands and knees and screams at God and says, "Is this as good as it gets?" Right? And I think that's such a metaphor for people like in early recovery where they're not doing anything other. I mean, these things are all important. I'm again, big advocate of 12-step recovery and therapy and everything else. It's all great. But if that's all they're doing, it's like, is this as good as it gets? Is this why I did all of this? And that's where the purpose and meaning comes into play, and finding something else. And I do believe that's part of recovery.
Yeah. So when I want to go back to the marijuana thing with, listen, I go in New York and all you smell is weed. You're walking down the street and everybody's smoking. Do you think we've gone too far with the legalization?
Absolutely. I'm seeing things that are eerily similar to the big tobacco times, right? And I think that at some point, similar to the big tobacco industry, when people woke up and said, how the hell did we let this happen? I think there's going to be the same thing with cannabis. I think there's going to be another reckoning. The reality is that the cannabis industry is so grossly unregulated, where in Florida, technically the current legal status, and I'll talk about the legal status too. The legal status of cannabis in Florida is that it's illegal for recreational use, and it's only legal for medical use. However, any medical condition or psychiatric condition can be qualifying to get a medical card. And guess how old you have to be to get a medical card? 18.
Really?
So that means that if you happen to have an early birthday, if you're 18 and you're in high school, so let's say September, October, you can do a virtual appointment, right? You basically fill out a questionnaire, do a virtual appointment for maybe 5-10 minutes with a doctor. You pay him $150, maybe a little less, and then you get a medical card, which is not a prescription. The reason I say it's not a prescription is that it's basically a license. So it's a license that you carry with you to go into any one of the number of dispensaries in South Florida, and you get access to an amount of cannabis monthly that no one person could possibly consume.
Really?
Yeah.
You get that much?
Absolutely. And you get a combination of edibles, which are, the
gummies?
The gummies, cookies, brownies, lollipops, you name it. There's an edible for it, and the cartridges, and then the flower.
Isn't that just like fruit-flavored vapes?
Correct.
They got rid of the fruit flavor because they were attracting kids. Now you have gummies, cookies, and brownie marijuana that attract kids.
Yep, and flavor. And that not only attract kids, but our kids are able to purchase it, right? So in states that are legal for recreational, you have to be 21. In states that are legal for medical, you only have to be 18. Even more concerning, you can get a medical card if you have parental permission. So I've had cases where parents, because they felt that they were protecting their child because their child was purchasing cannabis on the street, so they would get their child a medical card. And then they would go into the dispensary and get it for them. So the accessibility has gone out of control, and medical is a guise for safety. It's not safe just because it's medical. In fact, most of the medical cannabis is those really high potency products. So I want to go back to the idea that this is not a true prescription. The people that work in the medical dispensaries, they call them bud tenders. Right?
Bud tenders,
right? So they're not pharmacists, right? So you go to a pharmacy to fill a prescription, you have a pharmacist, you have a pharmacy technician. That person had some level of education to be able to dispense the medication and educate you about that. At the cannabis dispensary, the bud tenders are college kids.
College kids who experiences smoking weed.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That is their experience. So, and there's no warning labels. There's nothing on the high potency products that says like warning, in some cases has caused psychosis and panic attacks, right? And people say, oh, your warning label won't do anything. Well, that's not true. We know from evidence that warning labels actually made a huge impact on the tobacco industry. When they started to mandate warning labels, it really does. You go to Canada or some other states, there's pictures of like lungs covered in tar.
Oh, you go to Egypt.
Yeah.
I mean, they have death. You're looking at, you're going to die if you keep smoking.
Right. And so there is something that happens to people psychologically when they're constantly purchasing something that's telling them that they're going to die. And similarly, so other countries have actually begun to put warning labels on cannabis products. The United States is not one of them. And so it's just vastly unregulated. Now, you get into the recreational side. So states really fall into one of three categories. It's either legal for recreational and medical, so basically broadly legal. It's only legal for medical, which most states start with that. Any state that's fully legalized has started with medical. Or in the rare case, so the last state I spoke at was in Indiana, or no, it was Wisconsin, and they're still illegal for both recreational and medical.
When you speak, what are you speaking on?
So usually my kind of standard presentation for cannabis, the title of it is Cannabis-Induced Psychosis and Recent Trends in Cannabis Use. And so what I cover in that is all the recent trends in cannabis use, the potency, the accessibility, the frequency of psychosis occurring. And then I also cover other, adverse effects of it, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I'll even take it a step further that when you really think about who uses cannabis the most, and historically that's always been young people, right? It's a young person's substance generally. I mean, older people smoke pot, of course, but you have people that, they don't have good impulse control. They have developing brains. They're more susceptible to psychotic breaks. So the vast majority of psychotic breaks happen between the ages of 18 and 30. And that is the far, far vast majority of first-time cannabis users is between 18 to 30. So you have an extremely vulnerable population that has accessibility to a highly potent cannabis product, more so than ever in history, because so that is incredibly problematic.
So when you think about the medical use of marijuana, is there any, from what you have found, really legitimate medical uses for marijuana?
So cannabis was recently rescheduled. I don't know if you followed that, but the current administration rescheduled cannabis. So the scheduling of substances, it falls into different categories, and cannabis used to be what was called a Scheduled 1 substance. And anything that's a Scheduled 1 substance has no accepted medical use, which is interesting, right? So cannabis was in that category until very recently, where there was no accepted medical use. Now, with that being said, do some people report cannabis helping with pain? Of course. Do some people report cannabis helping with insomnia? Yes. There's a really interesting study about severe seizure disorders in children, where different types of like cannabis, like balms essentially, or like lotions, can actually help stop and prevent future seizures. Now, these are very, very low dose, or even like CBD products, which should contain 0% THC. But those are some accepted medical uses. So I think the issue is that what are the risks associated with using cannabis to treat those medical issues versus trying some alternative method?
And what would be an alternative method?
So an alternative method, I mean, if it's pain, right, it could be, obviously you don't want to go down the road of opioids, right? But I mean, physical therapy, surgery if it's needed, something like acetaminophen or ibuprofen, something else other than going straight to cannabis. Now, this is not because I get, as you can imagine, I've gotten a lot of hate mail, I guess you could say, about this, because people are very protective of their cannabis. And so if there's people out there that are using cannabis for their medical issues and they're finding benefit from it and they're not experiencing any adverse consequences, that's great. I'm not in conflict with that. I just think we have to be really careful with the broad prescribing of it. Again, I go back to the state of Florida and how the medical cards work. No one gets denied.
Right. Yeah. So what do you then think? What are your thoughts on plant-based medicines? Because that seems to be people wanting to connect with their spirituality. There's a lot of people that are in 12-step recovery that go to Mexico or wherever, shamans to to do this. I actually researched it for myself. I wanted to increase my spirituality. So it's got something in the mail about this place in South America where they do this thing, and the guy called me and we talked about it. And I asked him, I said, well, I'm in recovery and I'm a little concerned. He said, oh, I'm in recovery too. I said, oh, great. How long are you in recovery? He said, 4 years. He said, yeah. So I said, has it helped you? He said, yes. I said, well, how many times have you done it? He said, 4. I said, well, if I did it, I'd want it one and done. Whatever problem I had, I'd want it fixed. That seems to me, that would lead me to doing the exact thing that led me to recovery. I don't want to do that. So I opted out. I didn't even try it. But there's a lot of people who seem to think, and I don't know if it works or not, that is really helpful for them.
I'm seeing it more and more now, and plant-based medicine is such a broad term because, it can include, the ayahuasca, psilocybin, which is the mushrooms. Mm-hmm. It is becoming more and more common, I think, amongst more traditionally abstinence-based 12-step programs. And I happen to know quite a few people. It's something that I've never really been interested in doing, but I know a lot of people that claim that it's been helpful. There's 2 ways to look at it. The first is that I think we'd be hard-pressed to find somebody, I've never met one, that would be addicted to ayahuasca.
Right.
Right.
But you could say the same thing about acid.
Sure.
I don't know anybody that's addicted to acid.
Right. And I think that hallucinogens are difficult to misuse in that way at that level of frequency.
Yeah.
That being said, I think that for some people, they can perhaps use ayahuasca once, maybe even quarterly. You said that gentleman used it 4 times. And maybe they won't experience any adverse consequences and they believe it's been some net positive for their life. At the same time, it's not, if the plant medicine starts to replace anything else, right? So when I first heard about ayahuasca, it was more under the guise of this is an alternative to inpatient treatment, right? You go to the ayahuasca retreat in Mexico for 2 weeks or whatever it is, but without integrating into some type of recovery community and meaningful, purposeful activity like we talked about, the research isn't great for it being a tool to remain in recovery.
Yeah. And the other drug that people are using that they're claiming, it used to be cat tranquilizer. The kids in rehab would get a job at the vet and take ketamine, cat tranquilizer. And now there are people, I guess the research shows that it's helpful, but I know a lot of people who have abused it and it hasn't been helpful, and they were the wrong people to get ketamine treatment.
Oh, yeah. I could talk about ketamine all day. So I do another presentation called Ketamine, Kava, and Kratom, the 3 Ks, right? I had somebody that works for a training organization asked me to put one together. So I've recently done a lot of research on ketamine, and it has become more and more popular. There's ketamine clinics popping all over.
Yeah.
There's virtual ketamine clinics now. And what I will tell you is I've had a handful of patients, I think 3, that were severely, persistently depressed with more or less constant suicidal ideations. Some of them were in recovery, some of them weren't. But they came to me and said, listen, I've learned a lot about ketamine and I'd like to try it. And in my mind, I'm like, this person's in rough shape, right? I mean, it was some of these cases, sadly, I was, week to week, I'm like, am I going to see this person again? I do all the safety planning and therapy I could possibly do with this individual, but they weren't getting better.
Yeah.
They had that treatment-resistant depression. And they went and did, some did what's called the S-ketamine, which is the nasal spray. So that's the only FDA-approved ketamine treatment. Then there's also the infusion, which is like, you lie down, you get an injection, essentially, an infusion of ketamine. And in all three cases, there was a pretty remarkable recovery. Now, what some research suggests is that part of that remarkable recovery is related to what's called hope and expectancy bias. So Stanford Medicine did this huge study on this, right? Where they did a study where people were, in order to double blind it, they put them under anesthesia. Some people got the ketamine and some people didn't. But you didn't know whether or not you got the ketamine. And even the people that were under the placebo believed they had received the ketamine because all of a sudden their depression and their suicidality got better.
Yeah.
So what they found is that because ketamine is marketed and believed to be this answer for severe depression, that hope and expectancy bias plays into it. Regardless, I think it should be approached with caution with somebody with a substance use disorder, somebody that has a severe history of addiction, because invariably there could be a relapse associated with it into whatever their drug of choice is. I'll say one more thing about it. There's an organization, maybe I won't say the name because, I don't want them to sue me.
Okay, don't say the name then.
But they are a online virtual ketamine company where you, Skype or Zoom with a doctor, and then they mail you the ketamine. They just mail it to you. And then you're supposed to take it with an observer, a virtual observer. Now, once you receive the ketamine, there's nothing that's actually mandating you to have that virtual observer. Ketamine's a dissociative medication. You can have health impacts. Mm-hmm. There's no one monitoring it. Mm-hmm. And one case I had where it was an individual with a severe alcohol problem. They had only been sober for a couple weeks. They got their ketamine mailed to them. They had a really bad experience and they started drinking.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
I've worked with 3 clients. 2 of them had a terrible experience with ketamine. And one of them, it was unbelievable. This guy walked around with a cloud of sadness, depression. His energy was just terrible. He did the ketamine and he's a changed man.
Right.
And it really made me a believer of it, but it's just like methadone. I believe there's probably a small percentage of people who can really benefit from it, but so many people got on it. The same with Suboxone. It was just too many people on this one thing that is only really appropriate for a few.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, as in this field, whenever there is a new miracle, treatment of some kind, we should approach it with some reasonable skepticism.
Yeah. And I also don't understand this gas station Kava, or how is that legal?
Yeah.
And people get so messed up over it.
Right. And so there's 2 substances that are often combined and kind of confused. So there's Kava and then there's Kratom.
It's Kratom.
Right. So I think you were talking about Kratom. We'll talk about Kava in a second. But so you go anywhere around South Florida, there's a lot of, they're called Kava bars, but they also serve Kratom. And now you can also go into gas stations and purchase it.
Yeah.
So Kratom is a really interesting substance in that in lower doses, I forget the exact amount, but in lower doses, it has a stimulating effect. So it was originally used for, people in Southeast Asia. They were like long farm workers, and they would chew on some kratom leaves, to kind of pep up their energy, similar to coca leaves.
Coca leaves, yeah.
Yeah, similar to coca leaves. And in small doses, it would give them more energy, kind of like afternoon cup of coffee or something, right? And so, but in larger doses, it has that opioid analgesic effect where people, I've spoken with people on Kratom. I'm like, man, this guy looks like he's on heroin.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's how they feel.
And that's how they feel. They have they're itching because similar to opioids, it releases histamine in the system. So they're itching. They get the recessed, pinned pupils. They're nodding off. And I remember
the withdrawal is just as bad as
it is.
Yeah.
It is. And what they recently banned is something called 7-OH, which was the kratom concentrate. So that was banned in Florida. It's not banned in every state. And that stuff, I cannot believe. I mean, first of all, it shouldn't be accessible in general, but the concentrate in general was so strong and people were getting so severely addicted to it. It was like going to a store and purchasing heroin.
Yeah, I just did an intervention on a guy, and I can't remember what it was, but I think it was that. He was in Maryland.
Right.
And whatever he was getting from the gas station was Kratom with a number on it.
Yeah.
And this guy might as well have been doing heroin. And the withdrawal was so bad, I sent him out to rehab. But it was just a terrible experience for him.
Oh, yeah. And what's also so problematic is that you talk about insurance coverage, right? So what's the diagnosis?
Right.
Right? Because it's not an opioid.
Yeah.
So you have to put in something. The only thing that they can really put it as is something called unspecified opiate like substance disorder or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of problem with getting treatment coverage. You have a lot of problem with withdrawal protocols.
Yeah.
Right? How do you treat the withdrawal symptoms?
Yeah.
You can reasonably estimate based on a drug test, amount of heroin or OxyContin that someone's using. When someone comes in and says, hey, I use 15 grams of Kratom or I drink 7 of the 7-OH concentrates a day.
Yeah.
The doctors are like, I guess I'll give you Suboxone.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of complications there too. And what ends up happening is that, so there's been an attempt to schedule Kratom as an illegal substance, but they have these, this may sound strange, but they have these Kratom advocacy groups, these like legislative advocacy groups that petition Congress and have a lot of money to prevent it from other lobbyists. That's what I'm looking for. And to prevent it from becoming illegal.
Yeah. And you're going to say something about Kava bars?
Yeah. So the Kava, Kava is a completely separate substance, right? It has nothing to do with Kratom. They're often sold in the same thing. Kava was, again, it was more used as a social alternative to drinking.
Where does it come from?
So it comes from a root. Again, I think it's also Southeast Asia. It's a root that's kind of like ground, and it's put in this kind of like, it looks like muddy water. They put in this bowl. And, Kava, you can only drink so much of it before you start to get sick. It has sedating qualities, right, as like a sedative. But there's an argument that Kava is less negatively impactful than Kratom. But yeah, it's totally legal. It's sold at, Kava bars. Many of them require you be 21, some 18. And unfortunately, it's, again, very unregulated.
Yeah. Okay. So the last question I want to ask you is about families and you working with families. What typically do you do with families? How do you help families that, have a son or a daughter? And what is the ongoing care for families?
Sure. So it really depends on what stage I start working with them. So if I work with them in an intervention or consulting capacity, I'm really jumping into whatever the current crisis is at that time. And the first thing to do is really to try and triage the situation. Okay, this is the situation. This is the best placement for them. This is the type of support that they need. Depending on the family, I may have to work with them for quite some time before we meaningfully intervene on their loved one because they're just not quite ready. But I believe that ongoing consistent support for families is the most important thing. And I tell them on the front end that I'm fairly confident I can get your loved one into treatment, but you all are going to need ongoing support, either from me or a family coach or some type of structured program. I know in the past we participated in some structured family recovery, and something that keeps the family engaged so they receive ongoing support. Families are often so neglected, and quality treatment programs really should have some type of ongoing family care, but they often don't.
Absolutely. And to me, it doesn't even make good sense, because families pay for treatment. Why? I mean, it would be a great marketing idea if you actually treated families and they would sell your program for you. They would this place was great. They helped me out. I had a group. I had a therapist. We, did some things. And really, when the family changes, it really does force the addict or the alcoholic to change. And the family has gone through everything the addict has gone through other than the drug use. So stress sensitivity, concentration problems, eating too much, eating too little, intimacy issues, loss of money. They've gone through all of the same things for the same period of time as the addict. But the addict gets 24 hours, 7 day a week, 30, 60, 90 days of treatment, and the family gets a phone call once a week.
Right.
Updating them on their loved one versus, Mom, we need to get you doing something.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to get families some support, right? Mm-hmm. And something that always drives me crazy is this parent and family blaming when you're not helping them.
Right. You're not helping them at all. You're telling them they're enabling. Okay, let them enable, but help them to enable recovery.
Right.
Instead of enabling the disease, understand that they're a family in crisis. They're not a dysfunctional family. They're dealing with a crisis here. How else would you deal with that other than what they do? I don't want to see my loved one on the street.
Right. And I'll never forget, I was working with this guy. This was a husband-spouse situation. And his wife was in treatment, and he was getting, he was my individual therapy client. And his wife was in treatment. He was getting no support from the facility. And he came in and raging one day. He goes, can you, effing believe what they said to me? I'm like, what did they say to you? He goes, they told me I'm effing codependent. She's my fucking wife, is what he said to me. And I'm like, that's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I mean, they label them codependent without offering him any type of meaningful support. And in his mind, he's like, she's my wife. Of course I'm codependent on her. Right? I'm worried about her. She's in treatment,
Yeah.
And so it's just, I mean, I say that to mean when we work with families, we try and work with them as long as they're willing to engage. Sometimes the level of engagement is higher or lower depending on the family. But the reality is that families need support, not judgment.
They need support. They need direction. Yeah, they need to be challenged. But they need treatment, just like their child does or their other half does. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, John, this was great having you here today. What's the future for you and your company? And are you writing a book?
I'm not writing a book, no.
John, you got to write a book. You got at least a book in you.
Yeah. I think I got a book in me. No, thanks so much for having me, Michael. And as far as what's in store, I don't necessarily have any grand plans. I'm going to keep providing the type of care that we're providing at Full Life, and I'm going to keep doing trainings because I love it, and I love educating people on topics that are a little less common. And we'll see what the future holds in store of a book too. Yeah. Maybe you just inspired me.
And if you do write a book, there needs to be a couple of pages on Michael Herbert. Because I'm going to take a little bit of credit for where you're at today. We had this discussion about you making a decision about doing something. And I got to tell you, John, it was just kind of heavy on my heart. It's like, no, don't do that. Stay right where you're at. Right. You're going to be, maybe you're just so,
No, absolutely. No, I give you a lot of credit for that, because I often think, because that particular place I was planning on working, people get sucked into a vortex there.
Yeah.
And they don't leave often, or at least at the time, that was more common. And that's why, again, I go back to, I was fortunate to work in an agency with people with experience that were willing to be honest with me and sit me down. And had you not sat me down, I mean, I was ready to go.
Yeah, ready to go. And I got to tell you, if you did, I don't believe you'd have what you have today. And to me, it just didn't make sense for you to leave here and go somewhere else to do what?
Right. And in hindsight, it made no sense at all. Yeah. But at the time, I thought it made sense. And, I had some people that questioned it, but I think when I got that feedback from you, I was like, you don't have any skin in the game here, right? In terms of, you weren't a higher up at the agency I was working for that was trying to get me to stay because they wanted me to. You were just genuinely concerned.
Yeah. Listen, I don't have any skin in the game for a lot of things. It's just kind of my thoughts.
Yeah.
Listen, sometimes I'm giving my thoughts and opinions they're not asked for, but it's just kind of on my mind what makes sense to me. And so I'm glad you stayed, and then I'm glad you made the decision to start your agency, because you're doing really good work out there. And
Thanks,
I've
Michael.
heard nothing but good things about what you do, and you're consistent, you're ethical, and you just have a great program.
I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where can people find you if they want to?
Sure. So our main website is flmentalhealth.com. So that'll bring you to the main website. You can just Google Full Life Comprehensive Care, Google John Puls, and it'll all come right up.
Mm-hmm. Any Instagram or Facebook
Oh,
stuff?
yeah. So we have, an Instagram page, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn.
YouTube?
Not YouTube, no.
Oh, all these podcasts you've been on, you have enough content for a YouTube channel.
I know, I should. I've thought about that. I'm on YouTube because of various podcasts and everything, but I don't have a specific channel. It's something I've thought about.
Yeah, you got to corral all your stuff in so somebody could just binge watch you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for coming, John.
Yeah,
I really
thanks so much,
appreciate
Michael.
it. Yep.
Appreciate it.
All right. This episode is sponsored by Guardian Recovery. If you or someone you love is struggling with addiction or mental health challenges, Guardian can help. Visit guardianrecovery.com or call the number below for confidential support and guidance.